Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby. Here with me are the men behind Back to the Future, the musical, Glen Ballard and Alan Silvestri. This film is obviously a beloved classic. Now we're taking it to the stage, and I'm curious, was there any kind of one aspect of this story that you grabbed onto that spoke to you that said, okay, this is how we're going to tackle this stage adaptation and translate it that way?
Hmm. Glenn, why don't you start off?
Well, listen, as we investigated the story, the bones of the story itself, what we discovered was that it was already made for the stage. The dramaturgy was hiding within this incredible screenplay. And so it was obvious to us that from a musical standpoint, having 50s influenced music and 80s influenced music right away as musicians, we thought it was a delicious opportunity. And then we were inheriting one of the most incredible scores of all time that Alan wrote. So having that to start with as a concept, and also having some great music, it felt like we were in a pretty good place to launch this.
Absolutely. You mentioned Alan's score before, and it's an iconic score, and you actually have added lyrics to one of them, The Only a Matter of Time. What was
Mhm.
it like? What was the process of taking that song that you had written, that was non-lyrical, and finding lyrics to piece in there?
Well, it's when we started off on the journey, um, we we kind of put all the existing assets out on the table, and those were these incredible Huey Lewis songs, Johnny Be Good, Earth Angel, and the score. These were all things that were available to us, and I think one of the first things Glenn and I thought was, wouldn't it be fun to at least explore something lyrically for the theme from the film? And if it was too on the nose, we could always walk away from that. But it turned out to feel organic to what we were, doing in the overall sense of the show. And it was fun to have, that tip of the hat to taking some of that score and now having some lyric content, and it all just felt very natural.
And we already know it's a catchy tune, so it really works well in the musical, I think. Um, and speaking of musical theater, you both have a very long career in music and have written music for film. Glenn, you've done also countless recording artists. How does musical theater, the process, compare to those other mediums? What's the biggest difference in your process?
Well,
Glenn,
I having been in the record business for many years, the biggest difference for me is that you're not trying to write a hit song every time. You're really in what you're doing is you're using songwriting to tell stories, and what you hope that will emerge out of that will probably some hit songs, and the best shows always have that. But if you're just sitting down trying to write songs to get on the radio or get streamed, that is a somewhat narrow kind of predicate for it all. So that's the difference right away. We get to kind of use our full musical vocabulary and lyrical vocabulary without having to worry about whether or not is this a hit song on the radio right now. And that's a huge liberation for me, because it suddenly I have one of the greatest composers in the world in the room with me, and it's like, holy cow, we can use all of that, and we don't have to worry that it isn't like in the zeitgeist at the moment, because musical theater really kind of frees you. You're in your own world, in your own zone, and it's enormously liberating.
yeah. And it's interesting when Glenn talks about musical vocabulary. Glenn and I have worked together now for many years, and we both come at music from slightly different angles. Glenn has been this incredible songwriter and producer. I've been more on the film scoring side. And so to join forces and say, well, that is our palette now. We have everything from the hit song to film score to work with. And it's interesting because working our way through the musical, we found that there were places where we were exploring that range. And there are places in the show that are scored very cinematically, and other places where we're out and out singing a song. And so it was very interesting. And of course, you always hope that the project will guide the choices. And so that's at least what we aspire to. Let's find out what the show needs moment by moment, and use our entire arsenal of experience to bring the right response.
Yeah. I want to go back to, you mentioned your history of collaboration together, and I'm always so intrigued when there are two writers for a score, because what is your process like when the two of you sit down in a room? Is there a common way that you both find your way into a song? Does one person usually come up with a melody or lyric first? What's the way in for you?
I think we get in a room together and we're just trying to tell a story. I mean, the first time we wrote something way back in the day, I think maybe for Polar Express or something. I mean, Alan picked up a guitar, I picked up a guitar, and we just started exploring, just as songwriters, in the most broken down way, in the most fundamental way, how to do it. And if the DNA of that is strong, then you're probably in good shape. So Alan is a remarkable lyricist, a remarkable storyteller. I mean, all of his scores have a beginning, middle, and end. They have a point, and they're always telling the story, And so having that gift from Alan as a storyteller, I mean, we weren't sitting down thinking about an orchestra yet. We were sitting down thinking about the simple lyrics and music that would help us tell the story. And then knowing that we had this incredible place to land with his score, which to me always is great luxury, because I knew he would always bail us out with that.
Well, when we started out, the first time I met Glenn, it was intimidating because I had not explored much of the songwriting side of life, and I was going to one of the greatest songwriters to write songs. And I have to say, Glenn was just he was very comforting. That's where all of his producer experience must have come in. And I do remember that first day. And we started off with me and a guitar and my hand and Glenn with the yellow legal pad. And then we both had guitars. Then we both had yellow legal pads. And it's kind of how we've addressed, the solving of the challenge ever since. We really have no boundaries between us in terms of how we begin, how we find our way in, and how we work to completion. It's just the most amazing free form where no one has a specific task. It's let's figure out this situation, this challenge, and let's come up with a great solution.
Yeah, that's awesome. And there's other collaborators on this project. Glenn, you've mentioned the dramaturgy and storytelling of it all. Bob Gale and Robert Zemeckis were involved in this, obviously created the original movie. What was it like, if you have to go back to story, how valuable is it to have their input along the way?
It was invaluable. There were no two other people that could have authenticated all of what we were doing. They were the source, and so it was a great luxury. Believe me, we were on the phone with Mr. Gale on an almost daily basis, asking him to explicate the deep history of Hill Valley, and which he knows. I mean, the mythology is complete, and and we're trying to reveal it a piece at a time and a song at a time. So it was a great gift for us. Believe me, we didn't have to kind of like write a bunch of stuff and send it off and wait a few weeks. It was like he had his sleeves rolled up with us, and we were making a show.
Yeah, and it was incredible to be able to explore our wildest imaginings on the musical side, always knowing that if we came off the rails at any point, uh, you know, the Bobs and the Bobs would be there to put us back on track. And so it was very freeing. We could just go for it. And they would guide us. And very often they would jump on the train and say, go further. So as Glenn said, we had the source right there working with us constantly. And it was quite amazing.
Yeah. I think one of the things many folks don't realize about musical theater is just how long it takes for something to be created. It's often years through workshops and development, out of town tryouts. You know, you all went to Manchester, to the West End. You're finally on Broadway. What has changed the most for you in that period of time? Is there a bunch of material laying in a stack somewhere that had to be excised?
Glenn, why don't you start with that?
Well, I mean, in fact, there is a soundtrack out right now, the expanded version of the soundtrack for Back to the Future that includes about 8 or 10 songs that didn't make the cut. And that's typical, I'd say, for any show. You're going to write a bunch of songs and you have to be willing to kill some of your babies. I'm sorry, you just do. And you love them, but it's like there's just no room on the train, baby. So yeah, I mean, but you talk about the process. Yes, it's a long, long road to the stage. But considering I've worked in every other medium where you don't have that kind of luxury of time to develop something, I look at it as a gift rather than as an impediment. Of course, you have to survive throughout all of it. But to be able to gestate this material with great actors in workshops, you get to start over even. You get to, like, if you don't like something, you just write something else. If you're shooting a movie and you shoot the scene, it's very rare you're going to throw it away. You just got to use it, So it's a slow, long process. You have to have enormous stamina, and I love it.
Yeah, after whatever it was, 12 years, we're going to Manchester, and it's sheer panic the few weeks before we open, and you don't get everything done even after 12 years of preparation. And it was interesting because when we were opening in Manchester, Glenn and I were sitting there with, once again, our yellow legal pads, and we were making a list. And the list was, if we should be so fortunate as to be invited to the West End ever, then these are the things we want to go back and look at. And then, miracle of miracles, we're invited to the West End. And then it's sheer panic all over again to get opened. And as we're opening in the West End, Glenn and I are back with the yellow legal pads. And it's like, if we ever should be so fortunate as to be invited to Broadway, these are the things that we didn't get done now that we want to try there. And so that's how it goes. I mean, there's always more things that you learn as you go and that you want to try if you're allowed to go further.
Yeah. Do any of those things, you mentioned starting over in a few places, was it ever a case of an actor did something or was giving something you didn't expect, or the amazing technical effects like the DeLorean in the show, seeing it, does that change your view and give you more ideas for changes?
Well, I would have to say that the great Roger Bart inspired us throughout the entire process. And he certainly inspired us as writers. He inspired the cast because he gives it up in every rehearsal. And this is what I love about the commitment of, like, you get to see him go full out with your idea every time you give it to him. And even if you're making him look stupid, he's going to let you do that. And then you figure out that doesn't work. And that's to be able, the gift of working with an actor of that depth and of that generosity. Believe me, yes, and it influenced us a lot. I mean, in the second act, a couple of the songs in the second act, really, because it's like, we got to give him some more material. This guy, he's so great. He's always been like you know, a huge star in the movie, but we wanted to reveal more about who he was, you know, and we felt like he had earned that opportunity because he's such an incredible, he does things in the role that we never expected were possible, you know, so we just love him for that.
Well, after all that time in development and getting here to Broadway, on the way you won the Olivier Award for Best Musical. The show picked up Best Musical over there. What did that feel like to have that recognition after all this time in development and creating the show?
Well, I remember that evening moment by moment, and it was in a sense, it was one of those things you do not dare even dream of. And we had quite a few nominations going into that evening, and we saw we saw ourselves missing success as we went through the evening. And this was the final moment of the evening. And it was absolutely amazing. And the lovely thing about it was this was the award that honored everyone involved in the making of Back to the Future, the musical. If there was one thing to succeed in that evening, it was Best New Musical, because we all shared the joy and sense of accomplishment from that, and it was just magical.
Well, magical there, and hopefully it's a very magical evening here on Broadway too. So congratulations on your years of work to get it here. Thank you for joining me today. And for everyone watching, make sure you stick with Gold Derby the rest of this season. Thank you.
Thank you.